This is a calm Italian bedtime story. Let your eyes close and simply listen. The first thing that changes is the sound. Not the view, not the color of the sky. The sound. A softer hush that settles over everything you thought was already quiet, as if the air itself has decided to lower its voice. You notice it when you step outside and the door closes behind you. The wood does not slam, it meets the frame and holds. A small, familiar resistance, a weight that belongs to mountain houses. You leave the key in the lock for a second, not because you forget, because the metal is cold and real in your fingers. Then you turn it once, only once. In places like this, once is enough. The stone under your shoes has the day inside it still, a faint, stored warmth. Not heat, just memory. It moves upward from the ground in a way you do not feel in cities. Here, the earth speaks slowly. Above you, the village sits tucked into itself. A handful of old houses gathered close, roofs layered like overlapping hands. Dark shutters, small balconies with iron railings, a narrow street that curves because it has never been forced to be straight. You take a step, then another. Your footsteps do not echo. They soften as soon as they land, because the air is fuller than before. Not with fog, with something smaller, something finer. The first snow, not falling in thick sheets, not arriving dramatically, just beginning, almost shy, one pale grain at a time. You lift your hand and hold it out under a street lamp. The lamp is old, the light is warm and slightly uneven. And in that light, you can finally see what the night has been doing quietly above you. Snowflakes, not perfect, not glittering, just small and honest. They drift down without urgency. They land on your sleeve. They vanish. They land again. They vanish again. It is not yet the kind of snow that stays. It is the kind that tests the air. The kind that asks a simple question. Is it time? The village seems to answer without speaking. Yes. You start walking, not toward anything important, not toward a landmark, just along the main lane that becomes smaller the farther it goes. The stones are worn smooth, where decades of boots have repeated the same path. The buildings lean close in places, as if they have been sharing warmth for centuries. There are no cars moving now, only one parked near the lower corner, partially under a cover. Its windshield already holds a dusting of white, a beginning. At the first bend, you pass a doorway with a brass number plate. The brass is dulled, not polished, It catches the street lamp for half a second, then returns to shadow. Someone has placed a small mat outside. It is thick and practical, not decorative. The corner of it is lifted slightly, as if it has been nudged 1,000 times and never corrected fully. You notice with a small, calm clarity that this village does not correct itself much. It adjusts. It continues. On a window ledge above, a line of geranium pots sits in a row. In summer, they would be red. Now, they are mostly stems and dark leaves, but the pots are still there, because in Italy, even when a thing is dormant, it is not removed. It is kept. It is trusted to return. Snow begins to gather on the edges of the terracotta rims, a thin white lip, like flour on a bowl. You take a deeper breath, and the air tastes cleaner than you expect. Not empty, clean. Wood smoke, very faint, cold stone, something like iron, and beneath that, a softer scent you cannot name. Dry herbs, or old wool, or the inside of a pantry that has been closed all day. You pass a small grocery shop, shutters down. A sign above it, painted by hand, letters slightly uneven. It has been there long enough that no one tries to make it modern. The snow touches the shutter slats and stays for a moment, then slips away, just as quietly. The village is still awake in small ways, not with people outside, with signs, a warm rectangle of light behind a curtain, a lamp left on in a stairwell, a faint clink that might be a spoon, meeting ceramic somewhere behind a wall, a television murmur, low, almost swallowed by thick stone. You continue upward, and the street tightens. It becomes narrower than your shoulders would like, then opens again into a small pocket of space, not a grand square, a widening, a place where two streets meet and pause. Here, an old fountain sits against a wall. In summer, it would sing. Tonight, it barely speaks. The water is thinner in winter. The sound is lower, a whisper that repeats itself. And as the first snow begins to settle on the stone rim, the fountain looks older than it did minutes ago, as if winter is a kind of time machine. You stand there for a moment, letting the repetition of the water reorganize your thoughts, not stopping them, softening their edges. A window above the fountain is cracked open, only a finger's width. And from that small opening, a thread of warmth escapes into the night. Not much, just enough to meet your face and disappear. It makes you imagine a kitchen inside, a table, a chair with a jacket draped over it, a pot that has been moved off the heat and left to rest. In mountain villages, rest is not laziness. It is the correct pace of things. You move on. Snow is slightly thicker now, not heavier, just more frequent. A steadier fall, and you notice how the village begins to change its surfaces. The black becomes gray, the edges become softer. The world loses sharpness. It looks more forgiving. You reach a staircase that climbs between two houses. The steps are uneven, some shallow, some tall. The stone is worn in the center from years of use. A metal handrail runs along one side, cold and slightly damp. You do not take it for balance. You let your fingers brush it anyway, because touch is grounding. Because night is easier when you can feel something that does not move. Halfway up, you stop, not to look at a view, to listen. Somewhere close, inside a house, a stove door closes with a soft clack. Not loud, not dramatic, a simple sound that means a fire has been fed, that someone has decided the night will be warm. A few seconds later, a tiny rush of air rises up the chimney outside. Invisible, but you can sense it in the way the smell of smoke shifts. It is a smell that belongs to winter, not to danger, to comfort, to continuity. You climb the rest of the steps, and the street changes again. Here, the houses are older. Stone fitted into stone. Doorways framed by thick arches. Small iron rings bolted into walls, once used for animals, now just part of the village's memory. The snow lands on those rings and holds, briefly, a tiny white crown, a detail you would never notice in summer. At the corner, a small chapel appears, not tall, not trying to be impressive, just present. A square bell tower, pale stone, a simple door. No light inside, but a street lamp nearby throws a warm arc across the steps. Snow drifts through that arc and glows for a second as it falls, then becomes dark again. You stand at the base of the chapel steps and feel the night expand around you. It is not an empty expansion. It is full of distance. Mountains beyond the village, hidden in darkness. Trees higher up, black silhouettes. A slope that drops away behind the last houses. You can sense the landscape even when you cannot see it. That is what mountains do. They teach your body to understand space. You sit on the lowest step for a moment. The stone is colder than you expect. Cold enough to be honest. You breathe in, and the breath leaves your mouth in a faint cloud, not a dramatic puff. Just a sign, a reminder that you are here, that the air is real, that time is moving, slowly. Somewhere below, A shutter closes, a soft wooden sound. Not hurried, not annoyed, just someone finishing their evening. You do not imagine them clearly. You do not need a face. The village is not about characters. It is about rhythms. And the rhythm tonight is gentle. You stand again and continue along the higher street that curves toward the edge. Here, the road is narrower and the houses are fewer. A low wall runs along one side. Beyond it, darkness. The kind of darkness that is not scary. The kind that is simply far. You stop at the wall and rest your hands on it. The stone is rough, grainy, cold. Snow gathers on the top edge in a thin line. The first line of winter. You look out. In the distance, a handful of lights in another village flicker like embers. Not bright enough to claim attention. Just present enough to say, others are there too. The sky above is deep blue-black. Clouds move slowly, but there are openings. And in those openings, you can see stars. Not sharp, not sparkling. Soft, steady points that have been doing the same thing for longer than any village has existed. Snow falls between you and the stars, a quiet curtain, and for a moment, it feels like the entire world has chosen to move more slowly. You turn back toward the village, because the village holds warmth. And winter, even when it is beautiful, asks for shelter eventually. As you walk, you notice small Italian details that do not need to announce themselves. A broom leaning against a wall, bristles worn and splayed. A plastic crate tucked under a bench. A small flower pot saucer filled with water, now thinly iced at the edge. A stack of firewood neatly arranged, not for show, but because it must be accessible with cold hands. Then you see something that feels especially Italian, especially mountain Italian. A doormat made from thick woven rope. Heavy, practical, and beside it, a pair of rubber boots left outside, turned slightly outward, as if they were removed in one motion and placed down without thinking. This is not disorder. It is habit. It is the trust that tomorrow will come and the boots will be needed again. The snow begins to dust the tops of those boots. A soft white cap. They look like they are already part of the season. You continue down a side lane and the street becomes quieter. Not because there is less life, because the walls are thicker. The village is built to keep sound in. And in winter, sound is saved like warmth. A door you pass has a wreath made of dried herbs, tied with string. Not bright, not decorated for anyone. Just a small bundle, functional and traditional, hanging there because herbs are part of the house. The snow touches the dried leaves, and they do not move. They have already finished moving for the year. At another door, you notice a brass bell pull, old, slightly tarnished. No one pulls it now. Everyone knocks or texts, but the bell is still there, because in Italy, objects are not removed just because they are not used every day. They are allowed to remain, allowed to carry time. You reach a lower part of the village where a small workshop sits, closed. The sign is carved wood. The shutters are down, but through a tiny gap, you see shelves inside. Tools, not power tools, hand tools, a plane, a saw, a clamp, the kind of place that smells of resin and dust and patience. And you realize something about the traditions YouTube likes to describe. They are rarely ceremonies. They are work that repeats quietly until it becomes culture. A village like this has been shaped by hands doing the same small things over generations, sharpening, fixing, mending, sweeping, stacking wood, wiping counters, closing shutters, turning keys once. You turn another corner and the snow finally begins to stay on the stone. Not everywhere, in patches, in seams, on the edges of steps, on the tops of low walls, on the roof tiles that can catch it. The village starts to look like a photograph from another time. But it is not nostalgia. It is just winter doing what it always does, making the present feel older. Not in a sad way, in a calm way, a way that says everything is part of a cycle. You pass a small courtyard between houses, not a public square, a private little pocket. There is a basin there, used in summer for washing vegetables or rinsing hands. Tonight, it holds nothing but shadow. A metal tap above it has a thin line of frost. The snow gathers on the basin rim, and you think of how in a few weeks someone will twist that tap and the water will run again. Not because winter disappears, because the village knows how to keep moving through it. On the edge of the courtyard, a small chair sits under a covered corner. It is not brought inside, it is left out because it is useful. Because sometimes someone steps out to shake a rug, or to check the wood pile, or to feel the air and return. The chair has lived many winters. Its paint is chipped. Its legs are slightly uneven. It still stands. That is a kind of tradition too. Not a ritual, a decision, repeated, to keep what still works. Snow begins to cover the seat, a thin white layer, a soft eraser. You notice a small ashtray on the stone ledge nearby. Not new, metal, dull, the kind that belongs to balconies and courtyards. It is not romantic. It is simply part of how evenings have been lived here. You can imagine an older man stepping out after dinner, not saying much, just standing under the covered corner while snow begins, the smoke rising into cold air, disappearing quickly. Not a dramatic moment, a small punctuation, then back inside where the heat is. In villages, these small punctuations are what build nights. You continue walking, and the street leads you toward the upper edge again, but from a different angle. Now, you pass behind houses, where the village shows its working side. Stacks of firewood, a wheelbarrow tipped against a wall, a coil of rope hanging from a nail, a pile of tiles covered with a tarp. Snow lands on the tarp and softens its creases. You stop for a moment by a doorway where a cloth bag hangs from a hook. A reusable bag, thick fabric, old, likely used for bread, for flour, for small groceries. In cities, bags are replaced. Here, a bag can last a decade if it is strong, if it is washed, if it is simply kept. Snow touches the top of the bag and melts, leaving a darker spot, a small mark, a quiet sign that the season has begun. You move back toward the center of the village. The fountain is still whispering, but the sound is softer now because snow is absorbing it. The stacked chairs outside the closed cafe are now dusted with white. The cafe sign is dark, but it feels cared for, not abandoned. You pause and imagine mornings here, not busy mornings, slow ones, an espresso machine warming up, a glass of water placed beside a coffee cup without asking, a newspaper opened and folded in a particular way, a hand tapping the edge of the paper once against the counter to straighten it, a small nod between people who have seen each other for years and do not need conversation to confirm it. These are not big traditions. They are the daily rituals of being Italian in a small place. They do not exist to impress anyone. They exist because they have always existed. The snow continues. It is now steady enough that you can hear it faintly. Not the sound of snowflakes exactly, the sound of everything else being softened. The village becomes quieter, as if someone has lowered the volume of the world. You walk toward a narrow lane that leads to a small stone archway. The arch is old enough that it does not feel like architecture. It feels like a habit of stone. And beneath it, the street narrows into a passage between two houses. Here, the light is dimmer. The snow falls in a thicker cluster because the wind funnels through. You step through the passage and into another small pocket of space, a tiny open area where someone has placed a wooden bench against the wall. The bench has a thin layer of snow. On one end, a folded blanket is tucked into a plastic bag, protected, not stored inside, ready, as if someone knows that sometimes you sit outside for a moment, even in winter, just to feel the air, just to see if the snow is real. You touch the bench lightly. The wood is cold. The snow on it is powdery, still new. It breaks under your fingers, leaving a small line, a mark you immediately regret making, not because it matters, because the untouched surface felt like part of the calm. You step back and let the bench be. The village does not need you to interact with it. It only needs you to move through it slowly. You notice another gesture, quietly Italian, quietly mountain. A cloth laid on a balcony railing, not laundry, a thick cloth used to wipe hands or cover bread. It has been left there to air out. The snow begins to land on it, tiny points of white that melt into darker dots. In a few hours, someone will pull it in without thinking, fold it once, and place it in the kitchen drawer. Not ceremonially, correctly. That is how these lives are lived. You begin to feel the cold more now, not as discomfort, but as presence. Your cheeks tighten slightly. Your hands want to find pockets. You do. The fabric of your coat is a barrier. It keeps you connected to warmth without being fully warm. That is what winter evenings are. A constant negotiation between outside and inside, between air and shelter, between silence and the soft life behind walls. You pass a house where the shutters are closed, but not fully. One slat is left slightly open, and through that slat, a thin thread of warm light escapes. Not enough to illuminate the street, just enough to say, the inside exists. You can imagine a table, a pot of soup, a plate set down, someone breaking bread with hands instead of slicing it. In mountain villages, bread is often dense, sturdy, made to last, and it is broken, not because it is poetic, but because hands are easier than knives when you have lived that way. The snow collects on the outer shutter edge, a small ridge, a line that will grow if the night continues. And it will. Because the first snowfall is not a single event. It is an opening, a door that moves quietly on its hinges and stays ajar. From that moment on, the village does not return to what it was a few hours earlier. It shifts, almost imperceptibly. Sounds become shorter. Distances feel longer. Time stops pressing forward and begins to spread out, like a cloth laid carefully on a table. You notice it in the way lights are left on just a little longer, in the way footsteps hesitate before crossing a threshold, in the way people do not hurry to finish things once the snow has begun. The village understands that winter has arrived not to interrupt life, but to change its rhythm. Tomorrow morning. More Italian bedtime stories coming very soon. If you enjoyed this moment of calm, subscribe and like the video for more gentle storytelling.